How should I describe my relationship with my grandmother or grandma? Some of my earliest memories involve her, but we didn't always get along. I was the lazy one, my hair was never combed, and there are debates about whether she thinks I burned that bowl of Easy Mac in the microwave on purpose and was being careless, but I know that I said it for only 2 minutes. But I also wondered, why is she so mean? Does she love me? And yet, I know now that she does. And I know how she shows that she loves me. Our relationship has changed a lot.
This is the first time I told anybody this. Let's see how you get stuff out of me.
We're close now. And doing an oral history interview with her has shown me exactly how and why we get along so well. It's because we are so much alike. And to understand that, I really needed to understand her childhood. Her earliest memories come around the age of 5. My grandma, Versie Jean, was born in 1950 in rural Mississippi. She lived in the house with her grandfather, Early, grandmother, Janie, mother, Thadine, aunts, Erlene, Israel, Catherine, and uncles, Dub, Eddie, Johnny, and James. Now, if you hear my grandma say Uncle Junior, that is Uncle Eddie. It's okay. I'm confused too. Eventually, her siblings would live there too. Larry lived at the first house they lived in, but eventually you'll also hear the names Steve and Janice, siblings that will be born a little bit later.
They didn't have indoor and outdoor plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
And the water place you go get the water was across the field and carry it back. So whatever they did their business at night, during the night, in the morning, whatever, you had to take it out toward them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I did that until we came to New Orleans.
My grandmother's migration to New Orleans is a pivotal part in her life story, so we will be talking about that later. But also, pivotal to me is my association with my grandmother and food. I remember her cooking for me, but I don't know why, associate her with someone who has cooked food for me and shared love with me that way. So it was also interesting to hear her growing up and the way she experienced food as a child.
It was basic food. Garden greens and potatoes, the white potatoes and stuff like that. They were all prepared by my aunt Israel. I mean, everything was cool. You know that. I mean, you grew all your food, or you went hunting, and you got the meat, the rabbit, the squirrels, possum, raccoon, like that. You know, that's all I can remember. All I can remember, one thing I didn't like, it's like they used to call it spuds, because it was potatoes and it just cooked down in its own gravy.
Mm.
That'd probably be good now, but salt and pepper was the only season. Canning food. I remember them sewing.
My grandmother's father didn't live in that house with her. Her parents, my great grandparents, Thadine and Madeline, were married, and at 20, they had my grandma.
They got married, but he still was a player. And then he would still come to mama house even after his legs was off. And me and Larry was like 8, 9. We would go by him sometime on holidays. But then he had another family.
Because Thadine and Madeline were married, she was able to get money from the military to help raise my grandmother and her brother, my great uncle Larry. Not only was Madeline in the military, he was a disabled veteran who lost his legs when stepping on a mine either during the Korean War or while training for it.
That was the only way you could make some money, sturdy money, I guess. He goes to the military. He put down that he got children, right? So they got to call his above his head to get $100 and some dollars. Might have been $90 some dollars. But she was the only one in the house with an income. So she was able to buy a TV. I guess TV was about $40, $50. One of them big old TVs with a big old antenna, big as damn near house.
Through this interview, I've learned the most details I've ever known about my grandmother's childhood. She's told me before about canning. I didn't know about them only using salt and pepper for seasoning, but I didn't know that they hunted and grew their own food. I don't think she's previously told me about the slop jars or that they own their or that they sewed their own clothes. And while I did know that she'd pick cotton as a young girl, I didn't know that she'd make $2 to $3 from it.
I had to be really young, 8 or 9 years old, when I went to pick cotton and make just enough money to buy a piece of material to make dresses for the big meeting. The big meeting is like church all goddamn day. But it was a way, and then walking to church, at night, that was the entertainment.
It's striking to hear about my great aunt Janice, someone you'll hear more about later, as a historical character. I simply called her Auntie. She passed away in 2001, and of the people who played major roles in my grandmother's upbringing, she's one of the few, could potentially maybe the only, that also played a pivotal role in mine outside of my grandmother herself. I do remember meeting Maddie once before he passed away. Thadeen passed away when my mom was a baby, and honestly, when my grandmother was pretty young herself. The only person who lived in that house in Mississippi or lived in Mississippi at all with my grandmother who is still alive is her brother Steve. I have met him. To my grandma, these are real people that she lived with. But before this project, to me, they almost weren't. Honestly, my grandmother either. There was one time she told me to go sign her name. I think it was like Outback or Cracker Barrel. Either way, one time she told me to sign her name on a receipt. Don't sign it as grandma. Sign my name. And it's kind of similar with the other people that came before me. I kind of put them on pedestals, but the beauty in taking on this project, and honestly, what I've learned in grad school is realizing that not only is my grandmother a person, not simply a grandma, but my ancestors were people too. Maybe that's why I've always been so curious about my grandmother's life, to understand her and the people that make up my family. I've also been so curious about the moments that made up her childhood and how she spent her time.
I told you one time they had the rollaway beds and they shut me up in the bed. Yeah, they didn't know I was in there. Whatever, I just didn't care. Whatever. One less mouth to feed. I don't know.
Grandma also listened to a lot of grown folks' conversation, as they say, and how she would say now. As she got older, she had more work to do. She was the oldest. Her younger brother Larry, again, one of my great uncles, did things like walk to the next town to go to the drugstore to get their mother's prescriptions. My grandma stayed home to take care of her younger sister, Janice. Eventually, the family moved to a house closer to the highway, but that highway would become a major part of her life years later. The new house, where the rent was $5 a month in the late 50s, is where her grandmother, my great great grandmother, would eventually pass away from cancer. Eventually, my grandmother's aunts and uncles all moved away from home. One uncle left for the military, and the rest moved to New Orleans for work. The aunts, however, had more varied and different outcomes.
Well, okay. In Israel, Erling stayed in Mississippi. My mom was the only one that stayed home.
Okay.
When she was the last one to leave home. Even after she got married and she got money from him, she stayed home with her children. And Catherine moved here with Jake.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because he moved here for
work. They got married. He was still in the military.
Mm-hmm.
She stayed home. All these people were Mississippi people, sitting in that same area.
Mm-hmm.
In New Orleans.
The neighborhood my grandmother is talking about is the Upper Ninth Ward. She lived on Rushablaze Street and Louisa Street for a really long time. And the Louisa Street in that area is now called Johnny Jackson Jr. Boulevard.
Still, whenever I guess when somebody wanted to move, they were like, "Okay, this is where we all gonna be." It's kind of like was it like a community?
It wasn't. No, it wasn't welcome.
Tell me about this, Grandma.
It was not welcome. But Mama, think about this. You in an apartment smaller than what I have.
Mm-hmm.
A bedroom, small kitchen, and a bathroom. You come from Mississippi, no warning because there ain't no telephone. Can't send no message. It just show up on somebody's doorstep. But Mississippi people try to look out for each other. Now they gonna talk about it.
You may be wondering, how does Grandma, or to you, Versie Jean, know all of this stuff that happened? How did she pick up on all of this information?
You know how I sit around quietly, introverted, and hear people talk. They weren't necessarily talking to me.
As a fellow nosy person, I relate. My grandma and I are so similar. She is shy, always has been, and is introverted. So am I. My grandmother spent her 18th birthday in a bar on Florida Avenue alone because she didn't know what else to do. I spent my 18th birthday alone in the university library because I had no friends and I didn't know what to do. She tried to fit in, and so did I. I remember her being really close to her younger sister Janice, like I am now with my younger sister Faith. Just like me, my grandmother also struggled to make friends. Those true friends that you see everyone else have. And grandma really liked school too. She loved the plays that she went to, like The Frog Prince, which they put on one year at her school. She loved history. No surprise here. I'm a historic preservation and public history major. She also said the lunch was good and, quote, not like that stuff we have now, but she did not like math, and honestly, I can relate. All of this is an important part of her story, our shared story, because it shaped her experiences and it shaped how she's been treated by people who had and still have expectations on how Black women should be. But it's also notable because she mentioned it multiple times in her interview, having feelings about people thinking she was dumb because she's quiet, didn't like being put on the spot, and people commenting about that. It was interesting to learn that we had that in common, but it sucks that she didn't grow up in a world where being quiet was seen as a positive difference. We also talked about landmarks that are still there, like Mount Moriah Baptist Church, and also the corner store that was run by Mr. Green.
Oh, they had a store. They had which does not exist anymore. Like a corner store.
Mm-hmm.
And he owned some apartments. And we rented the first apartment from him. You ever been to a corner store?
Mm-hmm.
Where? Where you been to a corner store at?
They have them everywhere.
I can remember just as good because they had the magnolia trees and it smelled so good around it. Back then, everything was nice. Nobody was worried about nobody breaking in your house. So it was hot. Not as hot as it is now with this global tribe and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we would sleep in the room with the door open. The screen door, you know what I'm saying? Things were different. Things were definitely different back then.
Suddenly, we're in New Orleans, but why? How? We need to talk about why my grandmother left Mississippi. Her aunts and uncles left for better options. to work or be with loved ones who migrated for work. But my grandmother first told me about the sexual abuse she faced from her grandfather when I interviewed her during undergrad. This happened for about 4 years. While others left for better options, my grandmother's mother migrated them for my grandmother's safety. Grandma said the transition to New Orleans felt like she was in a daze.
Backstory.
Mm-hmm.
You know about the situation with the grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
So I told her what was going on in my whatever.
Mm-hmm.
She begged him not to do it anymore, blah, blah, blah. Larry heard Janice was across the field picking cucumbers. Larry came home for something and saw what he was doing. And then he went and told her. And, Mama was, I'm just not a crier like that. And your mama's not a crier either. I see where you get it from. So she packed us up and moved to Louisiana on a Greyhound bus. Greyhound bus used to pass down 42, and you go out there and flag it down. I don't know if it was the same day or the day before. You know what I'm saying? I can picture right now standing on the highway, on the highway waiting for the bus to pass, and flag the bus down, and with 4 children. So you got to imagine that she was scared too. Well, she knew she had brothers and sisters.
So she probably didn't even couldn't even call them, or there was no warning.
No warning. No warning. I mean, that first telephone I saw, the city had it better. The first telephone I saw, I had to be 10.
What do you remember about that time?
I was really glad to be away from what I came from. Because, Bray, you have to understand, I don't know nothing, but I know what he was doing was wrong. But I know it was an adventure to come here. But I don't know nothing.
My grandmother's migration happened when she was 12 in 1963. They had no furniture. Thaddean eventually had to go back to Mississippi and get some. They were living with different family members and their families before they rented the apartment from Mr. Green. But for everybody, the entire family, overall, migration really seems like it was a whirlwind.
We were all like a deer caught in headlights. If you could understand what I'm saying. You were glad to get away from the situation you were in. But we're going to the unknown. We knew our uncles and stuff like that.
Was there any culture shock going to New Orleans?
I can't remember too much about that, no. It's just that you felt unwanted, but...
By who?
By the sisters and brothers. We were just one sister and 3 brothers. Was it 4 brothers? 4 brothers.
What do you think that was about?
But, well, they didn't have much anyway, and then you got a sister with 4 children coming in. You kind of understand that. Yeah.
The 4 children.
Yeah. Then she was steadily getting high because, and I'm thinking now, escape from reality.
To understand this portion of my grandmother's life, to understand really Thaddean and the other women in my family, we have to go back to Mississippi. That's when the use of opioids began. None of these women are here for me to ask them any questions. Most of them passed away before I was born. Thaddean passed away from overdose when my grandmother was 24. This particular death has been discussed in multiple ways, from depending on who I'm talking to about it. And it's also discussed as accidental and intentional.
My mom was already taking Darvon.
Wait. So what she was taking it for? Because this is the opioid for pain.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to clock.
I
Okay.
think it was phantom pain. I think it was escapism. I'm thinking now. It's like escaping memories.
And it was patented in 1955.
You can get the other one it was a gray and black capsule. I can remember just like, because I know one time I tried to take one just to see what's the deal. And she would sleep all day. And she didn't have the motherly thing going on.
I knew about Thadine and my Aunt Catherine. They were sisters using the drugs. I didn't know it was more widespread than that. I also assumed that this is something that started in New Orleans, but it was not. This is important for many reasons because while others denied that the sexual abuse my grandma faced happened to them, they also tried to deny the fact that it happened to her. Yet, my grandmother saw her aunts and her mother start taking those pills. It also made me wonder the reason. There are other addictions that other family members of all genders have had outside of pills: alcohol, other drugs, Pepsi Cola, shopping, reading, etc. Hearing these stories from my grandmother kind of made me realize why I always heard my mother say, "Don't try this," or, addiction runs in our family. That has to be the most common warning sentence that I've heard throughout my childhood, or at least one of. I'm also wondering what made up the reality that they could have been escaping. What else have I inherited? I really wish I could ask, but as a future historian, as an emerging historian, I think I want to try and find out. For me and for the women in my family who are not in the position that I am in, who didn't get a chance to speak. My grandmother had been in New Orleans for about 2 years when Hurricane Betsy hit in 1965. She was living on Russia living in one side of what is now considered a duplex with her Uncle Dub and his wife and family on the other side. In 2021, during Hurricane Ida, my grandmother and other family members came to Atlanta to escape the hurricane. My mother's house was destroyed during that storm, and many other family homes as well had damage. My grandma was also without power. This was also the first time I learned about my grandmother's experience with a hurricane outside of Hurricane Katrina, which we kind of like experienced together. But during 2021, she told us for the first time about her experience with Betsy, about being in the mud, being inside as the waist high water rose, and having to be the oldest girl and basically being in charge of having to clean everything up.
The storm was coming, and being my friend Dorothy, who we lived in the first apartment across the street.
Your friend Dorothy?
We were out there, come on, Bessie, we ain't scared of you. And we were listening to the radio, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the water started coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it probably would have been better to stay in there. I don't know how far out the water got up. But the house in the front of us was built up on pilots, bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, come on in here, come on in here. That's how we got in there. But then water was up this high because it was mid-waist in their house. Even though it was up high, it still was mid-waist. That's where we stayed until Uncle Church. He came down there in that car, and by that time they had moved us to a school. They came through there with a boat and moved us to a school. Further up in the ninth ward, eighth ward, or whatever. And he came to that school in that little bit of ass car in all that water. But he got me, my mama, Ezel, and her 4 kids in that car, and took us to his house in Marrero.
Oh, so he had moved already.
Yeah, he just moved. He bought that house in '65, and he had just moved.
This is like such a transitional period for you. Do you remember how it felt at the time, or you were just like,
Go on with the flow. What else can you do?
Mm-hmm.
Go on with the flow. Nothing you can do, but at that age, what can you do? Get mad? You don't get mad and talk back. You don't. You don't get mad and talk back. You just go with the flow. So when we did come from Uncle Eddie's house, came back to the house, we had to wash the house out, holes and stuff. You know, I mean, they were wooden floors, not real wooden, not floors that you were getting now, but wooden floors. Our houses were built.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived there for, I guess, a few more years, and then we moved around the corner on Louisa Street. I was like 16, 17. I know I moved out. Then I got a job. And not too far from where I live now. Larry got the job first as a dishwasher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then I got the job with him as a dishwasher. I wasn't quite 18. I wasn't 18. So that's when I would come home getting my check of $26 for 6 days a week, from 6 in the evening to 2 in the morning.
While you was in school?
Yeah. I'm surprised I even graduated. But grit and determination make you do a lot of things you know.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't go to, because it was a hard time getting through school. Not that I didn't know some stuff, that I couldn't learn some stuff. I was tired. That's the only way I could make money. I mean, because like, you give your mama half your money, but you still got $13 left. You could buy clothes, buy something to eat. You know what I'm saying? And then she had the nerve to tell, well, he's the man in the house. Well, he need to be making his own money. Well, that's what I thought to myself.
You like, I ain't say that though.
I ain't say that. But after that, I moved with your Uncle Doug. He was living on Rushblade.
You still stay in the same area.
Right. Until I moved across the river.
And that was in 72-3.
So I moved with him, with Dub and his wife and his 4 children. And then we moved from there to Mazang. Uncle James had a church next door, and we lived next door to the church.
What?
Until I moved from there to, and this was in 70, 71. But she took me, Anna took me to get my driver's license. And so that was 71 when I got my driver's license. And so I moved from there, moved to Marrero. And then I was dealing with your grandpa, Uncle Willie Glenn. And I got pregnant. Not long after I moved to Marrero. I remember, that's why it's so good to live by yourself. I remember living with Uncle James, and ain't lie to me. Uncle Junior, ain't lie to me. And we got into it about something. And I went to crying and called my grandmother, your grandmother. And didn't want to go live with her, but hey. You know what she told me? That was before I got my first apartment. Well, that baby might keep my husband up. Yeah. So.
That's what they didn't say?
And then what I did was I worked, saved a little money. I don't know if I had that car back then. I don't think I had that car. Saved a little money up, and then got to my first apartment in 73. Yeah, in 73.
That's like a lot that happened in 10 years.
Was it only 10 years? It seemed like longer.
Exactly.
I started interviewing my grandmother in 2020. And let me just tell you this audio story doesn't even have the most interesting details, but I mean, she's still really interesting, right? Over the last couple years, I'd always ask her about historical events I'd learned about that she'd likely lived through. And occasionally it would stand out, or she'd say she vaguely remembered it. But I noticed that she said she was focused on surviving. And I wanted to dig deeper in this conversation about if there was another part to it as well.
I guess maybe I just didn't pay attention.
You feel like it's because you had so much going on in your personal life from such a young age?
Well, maybe so. Maybe so. Life could have turned out worse than what it is, because after leaving Mississippi and becoming of age,
Like, you like, I actually just want love, or like that kind of.
And you guess what, Bria? Guess what? I never found it. No matter how many relationships or one night stand or whatever, never found that true ride for you. You know, never found that until 1999 when I started betting on me, and this is where I'm at now.
For a while, just like her mother, my grandmother was a single mother with 4 kids. Eventually, though, she'd gotten married, and then she had her 2 youngest kids. But she decided she didn't want that relationship anymore. She realized that being with him was adding more stress to her. She wasn't getting the help that she wanted and needed, and decided they were better off as friends. Overall, though, my grandma said she struggled a lot with trying to make herself fit in. But you can hear the pride in her voice when she talks about how far she's come, especially when it comes to independence. My grandma and I have been talking about the interview and, additional details about her life since we did the oral history. And she also wanted to make sure I let people know that she's been resilient, that she's not in the state that she was in different stages of her life before 1999, as she said. She wants people to know that despite everything, even the details that I mentioned that are not here, she has survived and she's doing well.
What's one fun thing you remember?
Making my own money.
Ooh.
Making my own. I can't, because I was never a street person. I've never been. I've tried to be a street person, drinking and carrying on. You can't make yourself be what you're not. You know what I'm trying to say? I can't be what I'm not. And what I'm glad of now is because I can love me as me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Not what somebody else want to see you as.
The independence and self-love.
Independence and self-love. I really didn't have a terrible childhood. I just didn't have a mother that was, and then I wasn't the kind of mother that I should have been to my children. So it got better as time went on. All I can see from my children was them surviving. And me being there to help them survive. Because at one point, it was so hard, Bria, that I felt like just killing myself. I had got a $25,000 policy. And I could say, well, my sister will take my children. But I realized, look here, who it is, whether it's your sister or what, they're not going to treat your children right. And they might not do it on purpose. Nobody going to treat your children like you treat them.
You think all the drinking and the drugs and like the mental like unwellness is like from all like, because it's kind of like a pattern. Probably in every family, but our family too. Or like, what is it, girl? Like, what do you like of your opinion? What do you think it is?
When I was married to Leroy, I would go to the doctor and they'd give me nerve pills, but I saw a pattern. If I had continued that pattern, I probably would have wound up on drugs. But the doctor told me way back then, yeah, I can't keep giving you a prescription for these drugs. He said, you need to get rid of your problem. And that was Big Leroy. Because even though me and him we talked for hours, he wasn't a good husband. Marriage is not a cure for everything. Yeah, if I had stayed on them, stayed trying to deaden, because early on I knew the marriage that I was in was not the kind of marriage that I wanted. It never was. And the relationship that I was in wasn't the kind of relationship that I wanted.
Honestly, the highlight of this experience has not only been being able to share my grandmother's story and learn even more about her, to understand her resilience, and to therefore understand her and what I'm capable of, but I gotta say, a highlight has to be realizing just how much alike we are.
A lot of stuff, I've been an introvert and I didn't know what that word meant for a lot of years. And going through the years of trying to fit in with Tom, Dick, and Harry, I've gotten back to the introvert. But you know what? Let me tell you something, Bria. I've always been in my own head. What I mean by that, I was picturing stuff in my own head. Can't talk to nobody about it because people think you're crazy. But I was picturing stuff in my own, like daydreaming and awake. And I do that sometimes now. You know? Like, but I don't do it as often because I'm in a different space. Different spaces. I'm happier now. I'm not trying to. You know how you use the books to try to escape, but I don't use the book to try to escape anymore. Maybe that's why I'm not reading like I used to.
Wait. So when you're daydreaming, do you feel like you were thinking about just like an alternative reality where you making up stories?
Making up stories like I got this good looking man. He works with this good job, and I got a good job, and we were rich compared to some people. You know, I've never told nobody this before, so don't laugh at me.
I literally do the same thing. I've always like I. That's why I'm like
It's so scary. It's so scary because I used to think you were so weird. And come to find out, you were more alike than I knew.
So, as much as this has been about the understanding of my grandmother's journey to self love, this has been a journey to understanding the love story between me and my grandmother.